Thank you everyone for attending today. Today we are doing our presentation for Disability Awareness Week, and our theme is diversibility. This panel discussion is about intersectionality, and I have amazing panelists that will be helping me today discuss intersectionality and what it means to them. I'm going to share my screen. So our discussion, like I said, is going to be about intersectionality. And I'm going to share a quick video that's going to give us a little bit more information about what exactly intersectionality is.
Intersectionality. Have you heard this word before? Even if you have, you might not know what it means. Let's take a look at it. The first part's easy enough. Intersection, a place where things come together. Intersectionality refers to the reality that we all have multiple identities that intersect to make us who we are. It also gives us a way to talk about oppressions and privileges that overlap and reinforce each other. This term dates back to the 1980s and legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. She noticed that we didn't have an effective way to talk about how the experiences of Black women are different from the experiences of Black men and of white women. How? Black women endure both gender discrimination and racial discrimination. Over the last 30 years, scholars, educators, and activists have expanded the use of the word intersectionality to talk about identities beyond race and gender. Let's look at a few examples. Jerry has a disability, and his family lives below the poverty line. He is the oldest of 10, which requires him to do a lot of caregiving, and sometimes keeps him out of school. No one in the school counseling office has talked to Jerry or his parents about his plans for after graduation. He has applied for several jobs, but never gets called back. Fatima is Muslim and recently came to the United States from Somalia. She finds that many people at her school make assumptions about her values and abilities before they speak to her. Many of her classmates think she shouldn't be at their school at all. Greta comes from an affluent family. Both her parents and grandparents went to college, and her father owns a successful business. She doesn't think about her identity very often, but she does think of herself as someone who will go to college and get a good job once she graduates. Think about Greta's situation as opposed to Fatima's or Jerry's. Fatima and Jerry are members of marginalized groups. They don't get to choose whether or not to think about their identities. Greta, on the other hand, can ignore intersectionality if she wants to. Life isn't the same for everyone, even for people who share identity characteristics. By adopting an intersectional lens, we have a better opportunity to understand why and to change the institutions that help and harm us based on who we are. Want to learn more? Read our story, Teaching at the Intersections, in the summer 2016 issue of Teaching Tolerance magazine.
All right. So another definition of intersectionality is multiple aspects of our identities that impact who we are and the way we are seen and treated by others. Intersectionality is also the way that people can experience different, overlapping oppressions that affect them. So I also, after watching that video and that brief definition, I want to turn the time over to Daniel DeWitt, who is an accessibility advisor in the Disability Resource Center, and he's also over our DRC High School Transition Program. And he's just going to share a little bit more in-depth definition about intersectionality.
So first and foremost, I want to thank Melinda for all her hard work on this presentation. Without her dedication, this wouldn't have been possible. So special kudos to Melinda. When I was thinking about what to talk about in terms of intersectionality, I wanted to talk about something that maybe some outside of the disability community don't necessarily know. So thinking back to the video, it talked a lot about Jerry. Jerry would be somebody with a disability that we'd call within our department someone with a visible disability. So I want to first highlight that typically from our perspective in the DRC, we talk about disabilities in terms of visible and invisible disability. So why that's important is because when we watched the video, we saw that those intersecting identities were ones that you could tell by just looking at someone. And when we think about intersectionality or inclusivity or diversity through that lens, we're leaving out a lot of different types of people who have similar experiences to those who maybe have a visible disability. So thinking of students and people in the community that have mental health conditions, so anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, students and people in the community with ADHD or learning disabilities. Those would be folks we consider to have a invisible disability. So somebody with a diagnosis that you wouldn't necessarily knew had a diverse background or a member of a marginalized population. So keep that in mind, that when we're talking about intersecting identities, especially within the disability community, it's a spectrum. So like a lot of other marginalized populations or diverse communities, there's different parts of the spectrum, and wherever a person lands on that, it's important to understand that they definitely are a part of a diverse community and identify as a person within a diverse community. You may or may not know that based on looking at them. I also wanted to speak about power and privilege and discrimination and how that interfaces with intersectionality as well. So depending on how a person identifies, there are lots of ways that power and privilege and discrimination can impact them. So as we progress through this presentation, definitely consider those realities for people in diverse communities and marginalized populations, because it's going to be really important that as we move through these questions to truly grasp the understanding of what people are saying, we have to also understand where they're coming from and their perspectives that they have as real and as valuable to them and for us to learn and grow as maybe people who don't identify the same as other folks. So without overlapping too much with kind of the definition that Melinda talked about and the one from the video, I'm going to kind of put a button in it and then leave it to the professionals to kind of answer and speak to their identities. So again, special thanks to Melinda for putting this all together and inviting me here today. It's much appreciated, and it's great that these folks have been able to have the opportunity to speak about their identities and then how they interface with the community.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for that awesome definition, and also kind of just setting the tone for everyone that's participating today and will be tuning in to watch this recording, to really put yourself in the shoes of our panelists. And I feel honored that each of them have agreed to be a part of this panel discussion so that they can share their life and through their lens and share their intersectional identities. I just want to I just realized I didn't even introduce myself. So my name is Melinda Mostyn, and I am an accessibility advisor in the Disabilities Resource Center here at Salt Lake Community College. And I'm so excited to be a part of our Diversibility Week and to have this much needed discussion to be a part of our Diversibility Week and our program. I want to share some information, introduce our panelists today. And I did ask each of them to kind of provide some background information about themselves and get to know them a little bit better. And I'm so impressed by each of them and their stories. So our first panelist that is here with us today, her name is Carleen Mars, and Carleen identifies herself as queer gender, mentally ill, and disabled. She's published one book called Feeling Things in Public Places, which is a memoir on mental illness. Short stories, and lots of reviews. Her writings have been featured in Lambda Literary, Prismatica Magazine, and Peculiar Journal. She helps run the Writers with Mental Illness Club and volunteers with the Community Writing Center and works with English language learners. She's enrolled at Salt Lake Community College to pursue an English degree. Thank you so much for joining us, Carlene. Our second panelist is another student here at Salt Lake Community College. His name is Derek Tuff. Derek is pursuing a communications degree. He is passionate about diversity, inclusion, and sustainable independence. As an individual with multiple disabilities, he has real-life experience in surmounting obstacles that inhibit equality and success that he often shares as an empowerment speaker. He's an AmeriCorps Vista alumni and has held board positions in advocacy and educational organizations. He believes that empowering others is a critical responsibility that should never be overlooked. Thank you, Derek. Our next panelist is James Johnson. James is a lifelong person with cerebral palsy who has used a wheelchair most of his life. He has worked as a middle school teacher and accessibility advisor here at Salt Lake Community College and is now the disability advisor at the University of Utah. James has 2 bachelor's degrees from the University of Utah, a master's degree in teaching and learning, as well as a master's in rehabilitation counseling from the University of Utah. In his spare time, James enjoys reading and doing jigsaw puzzles. Thanks for being with us here today, James. Our next panelist is Brett Campbell. Brett's commitment to inclusion and social well-being led him to earn a bachelor's degree in social work from Weber State University and a master's degree in social work from the University of Utah. Following graduation, Brett worked as a counselor, including K-12 crisis counseling, addiction recovery, and AIDS Foundation. Brett has been with Salt Lake Community College since 2007, where he spent over 10 years in the classroom teaching study of disabilities. And he currently serves as an accessibility advisor in the Disability Resource Center. Thank you, Brett. Last but definitely not least is Jody Kinner. Jody Kinner was born in Germany and raised as an Air Force brat. She graduated from Gallaudet University with bachelor's and master's degree in social work. Shortly after graduating in 2000 and moving to Utah with her husband, Dwayne, she became an ADA accessibility advisor here at Salt Lake Community College. Since 2000, she has served on the Utah Interpreter Certification Advisory Board, JMS Utah Deaf Education and Literacy, Inc., Board, USDB Institutional Council and Advisory Council, and the Utah Deaf Education Core Group, the Utah Association of the Deaf and DSDHH Legislative Task Force. As a parent of 2 deaf children, Joshua and Danielle, she has been an advocate for deaf education in Utah, and this has led her to her involvement in numerous educational committees, including the 2009 USDB Legislative Task Force sponsored by the Utah State of Education. As representation of the Utah Association of the Deaf, Jody participated in the 2012 National Association of the Deaf's first ever Education Advocate Training Program. Jody does extensive research in Utah deaf history, particularly the civil rights of Utah deaf community since 2006, and is passionate about women's studies, especially or specifically how deaf women have impacted their communities. She enjoys reading, watching Korean dramas, and working on genealogy. Thank you so much for being here, Jody. So yeah, those were some really heavy bios. Like we have really great panelists with amazing lives and a history of serving their communities that they're a part of. And so I'm so thankful to have each of you here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again just so that I can show our questions that we will be going through. So let's just get into our questions now. So question number 1 is, what has your journey been in discovering your intersectionality? And I'm going to direct this question to Brett. if Brett, you could share your answer for what your journey has been in discovering your intersectionality.
Oh boy. That is, it has been a journey in a lot of ways, and it's made a lot of different changes over the years. And I would say my intersectionality has been redefined time after time as the years go by. I'm a totally blind individual, but I wasn't always. I was born with a cancer when I was about 9 months old. They weren't able to save any sight out of my right eye, and they were able to save a little bit out of my left eye with radiation treatment. And I think when I first realized, of course, I didn't realize the word intersectionality, but I didn't realize that I was different than my peers until my first day of kindergarten. And that's really when my journey began. It's like the very first day of school, the teacher brought me up to the front of the classroom and said, "This is Brett," and explained how he's a little bit different and he's going to need some help and blah, blah, blah. And there it went, just from there. And so I spent a lot of my time with my identity trying to fit in with everybody else, and therefore denying to myself that I was different. I planned on driving a car no matter what people told me. I knew I was going to get my driver's license. All of these different things. And then, but that was it, was trying not to have a disability, trying not to have a visible disability. And then that came to a dramatic change in my early mid-20s. The retina in my left eye began to go out. And after one surgery, I lost some sight, but I still had shadows and light and things like that. And then by my late 20s, it went pitch black and I've lost everything, no light perception or anything. So each of those events, I had to identify myself. And there were times when I found that rather than it just being intersectionality, it was kind of taking over my life. My identity was a blind person. And I wasn't happy being that way. And I realized I didn't have to be that way. But I also recognized that it was also part of the adjustment process of going totally blind. So I began digging into the different parts of myself, my part in my relationship. I married, my children. I've been fortunate enough to dabble in a number of jobs, and each one of them was gratifying and makes another piece of me. Though guide dogs point out that I'm a blind individual, they're still a part of my life that has nothing to do with being blind, because they're such my companion. And then just my hobbies, just loving to read, loving to shop, loving to travel. I very much look forward to doing that again one day. So all of these different pieces come into my intersectionality, but recognizing the journey has changed so much over the years, more so when I had major life events that I just shared. And then other little things along the way, like as I furthered my education and met new people and now working with the community college in the capacity of an advisor is a new chapter in my life. So it has been a journey. There's a lot of different pieces, but it all just makes up me. I'm Brett, and different than yesterday, and I'm going to be different from today, tomorrow. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Brett. I love this idea that you share that your intersectionality and your identity, as your identity has changed and gaining relationships and gaining your education, and also the fluctuation of your disability and how it had changed and progressed over time, that also changed your journey. And so I think that's so interesting. And thank you so much for sharing that. I also want to direct this question to our student, our English student, Carling, if you could share a little bit about what your journey has been in discovering your intersectionality.
Hi. So I have schizoaffective disorder, and it started developing when I was really, really young, when I was probably 5 or 6 years old. But I didn't really realize that there was anything different about me for a really long time, for 10 or 15 years after symptoms started. But I did realize that I was not straight when I was in high school. I came out when I was 15, and now I'm 32. So I've been out for longer than I have not. And I've been out as a disabled person for the last couple of years since I realized that my mental illness was affecting me to the point where I couldn't work a full-time job, and that it was impacting every aspect of my life. And I've found a lot of similarities between the disability community and the queer community, in that I have a lot of pride as a queer person and as a disabled person. And I have a lot of friends from my queerness and from my disability that I wouldn't have if I were a straight abled person. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you so much. I think that I love that Carlene is a part of our panel today, and that her sexuality is definitely a part of her identity. There's a lot of people that wouldn't consider their sexuality as part of their identity, but for a person that identifies with the LGBTQ plus community, knowing that that is a marginalized group, that is so much a part of their identity because of the barriers that they've had to experience in their life. And I love so much that you have found that to be a place of solace for you, to find relation with other people and be able to create a community of your own of support. Thank you so much. I'd also like to direct this question to our other student, Derek Tuff, if you'd like to share a little bit about your journey in discovering your intersectionality.
Are you able to hear me?
Oh, sorry. Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, I apologize. Hi, everyone. This concept is new to me. I just discovered it, and in discovering it, I realized that I thoroughly identify with it, but ironically, I can't pronounce it because I didn't hear it pronounced when I wasn't hearing impaired. And now, as I identify as a person with a hearing impairment, I thoroughly identify with the concept, but don't know how to pronounce it. So my journey has been unpredictable. I have Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, a rare form of it. So initially, I started with a physical impairment and a retinopathy of prematurity, which is legal blindness. And as I became older, CMT disease got worse, and my nerves started to deteriorate. As they started to deteriorate, I became hearing impaired, and I also have ADHD. Um, as a young child, my life was awesome. I found a way to quickly adapt to my disabilities to have an engaging social life. And I never thought that I would experience not being able to hear people on a daily basis because I'm a very sociable person and I love talking to people. So when I became hearing impaired, my life turned upside down because there was a whole world that I wanted to connect to, but I didn't know how to connect with them, or better yet, they didn't know how to adequately connect with me. So when I became hearing impaired, my journey just threw me way off course. But one thing that I realized is that when you have CMT and your disease can change at any given moment, you must understand that it's how you adapt to that disability to make it successful. If you can't or you can't control disability, I should say, but you can control how you adjust to that disability to make your life meaningful. So in my journey, I've realized that I shouldn't let disability dictate who I am. I should dictate what disability is to me. And there's nothing more than a characteristic that hinders my ability to an extent. But if I adapt to it and find alternative techniques, then I'm able to be or live the life that I want.
Thank you so much for that, Derek. You speak so beautifully about your journey, and I think that every person in this world experiences adaptability and changes as our life flows. But I think learning more about the concept of intersectionality, the more layers and the more intersecting identities that we have, the more adaptable that we need to be. So I'm so thankful for your experience that you're sharing with us about how well you've been able to adapt to all the changes, even knowing the things that you love so much personally and that you've had to adapt so that you can still enjoy your life to its fullest. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to go ahead and move on to question number 2. And question number 2 is, what are some of the tools you have used to teach others about who you are? I'd like to direct this question first to James Johnson. If you could share some of those tools with us about how you've taught others about who you are.
Sure, and I appreciate the opportunity to do this. I do want to give a shout out to Utah State University, which is the university at where I got my master's in rehab counseling. Although I love University of Utah, certainly I am a Utah man, but I want to make sure that if there are any Aggies that will watch this in the future or are currently watching this, that I show out my Aggie love as well. So, but the question is a good one. I mean, how do I teach people about my intersectionality? And I can think of 2 major ways. One, I'll quote a song: "There ain't nothing like the real thing, baby. There ain't nothing like the real thing." So it's just even interacting with me and experiencing a conversation or some part of your life with me to understand the different identities and senses of belongingness that I navigate on an everyday basis, right? And so, number one, it's really about having a relationship with one another and interacting with each other and being interested in learning from each other. Because once you do that, you'll really start learning and seeing things that you didn't see before. For example, yes, I'm a blue-eyed, blonde-haired, white man, but do I have full access to my white privilege? And I would tell you that my disability mitigates my access to my white privilege. Now, talk about creating some sort of mind-blowing experience for me, because here I am looking at myself and I'm white, and yet I belong rather to the ethnicity that has a great amount of power in this country, and yet I don't have full access to it, right? But you would never know that unless we had interactions and conversation, because you wouldn't see it, you wouldn't experience it, you just would assume, based on my appearance, that I would experience the world in a certain way as a white man. Well, not necessarily. So again, experience is important. Number 2, the second way that I do it is through metaphor. Because simply that's the best way to teach people is through metaphor. And sometimes I use to explain intersectionality the idea of a kaleidoscope. And you know how you twist a kaleidoscope and all the glass particles change and the perceptions change? Well, that's what intersectionality is for everybody, whether they recognize that they have a part in intersectionality. And really, when we're talking about that, again, it's a sense of belongingness. Where do you belong in this ever-changing, beautiful, diverse world of ours? And so I use metaphor a lot. The kaleidoscope is perfect because it will change moment to moment and day to day, and just and as it changes, your intersectionality changes. Or I use the metaphor of Colby Jack cheese. Yes, you know how it's both cheddar cheese and Monterey Jack cheese, and it's combined together. Well, that's my experience with disability. Yes, I'm a person with a disability, but I'm so much more than that. I'm blah blah blah, a scholar. I'm also an advocate. I'm also a puzzler, a voracious reader. All these things and so much more. I'm an athlete. I'm a singer. I'm all these things. But I'm also a person with a disability, so it's kind of that congealed set. And then I also, do you remember Fruit by the Foot? It's that fruit roll up stuff where it's clearly one color of fruit roll up and then clearly another. Sometimes that's me too, where I'm clearly just simply a person with a disability, and that's part of my job. But when I'm home, I'm clearly not. I have totally different responsibilities. So it's not just that they're mixed together, but they're completely separate too. And it really depends. It depends on the environment and when these things happen. So I use metaphor quite a lot. And then the other thing, and then I'll be done, is that people try and connect with me and say, well, James, everybody has a disability. They just don't know what it is. No. Incomplete thought. Everybody has functional limitations. Now, whether those functional limitations rise to the level of a disability is another issue. And the whole purpose of our jobs as what we do as disability advocates within higher education and the larger world. But everybody does have functional limitations. And so helping people understand, our intersectionality may not be about, well, everybody's disabled, James. No, that disrespects my experience, right? But it may be everybody has functional limitations and we have different experiences because of that. Let's talk about that and build a common ground. So, metaphor and really building common ground is how I teach people about who I am and what my life has been like.
Boy, those were amazing tools. Thank you so much for sharing. And I love the idea to share with the metaphor so that you can really try to explain on different levels. And I think using metaphors also shows the person that you're trying to teach that you're willing to get on their wavelength to connect with them and get them to understand you personally. So I love that so much. Thank you so much, James. I'm also going to direct this question to Jody, as she is a huge advocate for deaf history and sharing all of that information. I'd love to hear what Jody has to say about what are some of the tools you have used to teach others about who you are.
Sure. So let me make sure I can see my interpreter. Okay. Yes, I am a big researcher of history, especially Utah deaf history. I wrote my parents are in law. My husband's father is also deaf, and I've heard stories about the history around here from him. And I have 2 deaf children, so I've had to learn how to become advocates for deaf education for them. And being able to access just that deaf identity. I don't know. I have to advocate for my children in order to provide better resources for them. Also, I have become an avid researcher in histories. I've interviewed individuals. I've looked in collections, different journals, manuals, websites, scoured the web, trying to find information. And the history that is there really there's 2 schools that have been named after deaf people based on the history and the research that I've done. And if it weren't for that history, we wouldn't even know about these deaf leaders in our community. So I feel like history is a great way to allow people to see what the community looks like, to get more information. And again, there's been 2 schools that have been named after deaf leaders because of that research. I feel like doing advocacy of making sure that people have access to communication is a really great tool. But yeah, that's kind of my story.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jody. I think one of the tools that I didn't even realize that is so important for us to teach others is research. Research not only to teach others, but also to learn more personally about yourself so that you can share those tools with other people. How could you possibly share and teach others about who you are if you don't know that for yourself? So I love so much about all the research that you do, not only to help you better understand yourself, but your children and your deaf community and community of women. As you had said in your bio, that you are definitely an advocate for women's rights as well. So I love that so much. I'm going to go on to our next question. And that is, what advice would you give to your younger self? I'd like to direct this question to Brett. If you could tell us, as you shared already, that your disability evolved, even just your own life experiences as you've navigated life, your identity and intersectionality has changed a lot. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Well, first of all, I don't think my younger self would listen to me. It's just like, he'd be like, whatever, dude. You know, but if I would, I think I would just tell my younger self to accept the disability much younger. Don't worry about what other people think. The good people in life come to you. And I would tell myself to learn how to use a cane earlier. I tripped down a lot of stairs and ran into a lot of walls because I was too cool for a cane. I was more cool running into walls than I was using a cane for some reason. So I would adapt and develop those skills much earlier than I did. And I also just say kind of relax. And I still am kind of uptight. I just say relax. Everything's going to be okay. I think finally, I would just say you're going to marry the hottest babe in town, and don't worry. Then everything else is okay after that. So that's me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And you are married to an amazing woman. Shout out to Kathy Campbell. I would also like to direct this question to Carleen. If you could share what advice you would give to your younger self.
I think I would tell my younger self that there is a community of people who will help you and help you learn about yourself. I felt really, really, really alone, especially in my teens, as my symptoms were getting stronger and as I came out in a pretty straight town where there weren't a lot of other out kids at my high school. And I certainly didn't know anyone who was being vocal about mental illness when I was younger. But I wish I had known that I would find people who would support me and who would help educate me, and who I could also help educate, and we could all grow together. I think that would have been really helpful to know when I was a lot younger.
Thank you so much for sharing. I really love this question. I think that this question could be helpful for a lot of people to kind of just reflect. I like this question because it also is really reflective for all of us, and especially all of our panelists today who are community advocates. And so I think that there is a lot of information we would want to share with our younger selves, but now you guys are all doing that work now with those that you're reaching out to and you're working with daily. So I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing. The next question is, what was your experience growing up? I'd like to direct this question to Derek. If you could share with us your experience of growing up with, as you had said, that your intersectionality is a new concept, but after hearing and learning about it, you truly identify with that, with this concept. So I'd like to know, how was your experience growing up, specifically with all your intersecting identities?
I think my experience was normal. Um, my mom did her best to make sure that I had a life that I really enjoyed. I was in 2 to 3 week summer camps every summer. I often participated in after school programs. I enjoyed music, art, dancing, even though I was horrible at it. I still tried to 1 2 step in my wheelchair. So my childhood was beautiful. But I think as I got older, my when I became a teenager, that's when my life started to change because that's when my disability started to impact me more, and I didn't know how to adjust with them to get. I'm sorry. Let me stop. Let me back up. I didn't know how to adjust to my disabilities to make sure that people got my authentic self. So what I mean by that is, as I became more disabled, I tried to fool people on a regular basis that my disabilities didn't really exist, and I was the same person who they knew I were, specifically the hearing impairment. So don't try to minimize engagement or interactions with me because I'm still here and I'm still that funny Derek that you thought I was. So my childhood was beautiful because I didn't really have a disability that inhibited my participation in society per se. But as I became a teenager and became hard of hearing, then my social life really deteriorated. But that's okay because one thing people try to show me that is if you present your authentic self to individuals on a regular basis, then they will often accept you. People can't accept the fake you. So if you offer fakeness and they discover that fakeness and realize who you truly are, whether it's your disability or personality trait or whatever, then oftentimes they're going to reject you as a whole because you didn't present your authentic self. But if you present your authentic self in the beginning, then you give them a greater chance of accepting you to have a better relationship with them. I'll tie it to a theory, social exchange theory. Social exchange theory states that people start relationships based on rewards and costs. And one of those rewards is authenticity and honesty and truthfulness in a relationship. So if you're starting a relationship in a lie, you're starting a relationship costly. And oftentimes they won't continue that relationship because they felt violated. But if you show them your true self, your authentic self, then they're more than willing to keep that relationship going despite of your disability because they know exactly who you are and they'll do their best to accommodate you. So my childhood experiences kind of fluctuated as I became older.
I love that so much about really your experience growing up of really discovering your true authentic self and being able to be comfortable enough to share that and be vulnerable enough. I also wanted to speak on, it reminds me of what James had shared, that, a lot of people do experience their own limitations in life. And so everyone has their own identity, everyone has their own struggles in life. And so I think for you, Derek, that your ability to still be able to show your true authentic self then lends that to other people to share their true authentic self with you. I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing. I'd also like to direct this question to James. I think that this would be a great question for you.
Yeah, thank you. And I have had very similar experiences to what everybody has said here. And so I don't think I will add so much to that, other than to say, as somebody who is approaching middle-agedness, and that's cool. I'm happy with that. I've earned my age. That what I have learned too is that I am kind of a different evolution of the human species. I'm not human. I'm totally human. And I'm a human being, but I am a different evolution because of my disability and how it has encouraged me to adapt and overcome and just do things differently so that I can interact with the world and it can interact with me and I can make a difference, right? I wouldn't say I'm a Homo sapien anymore. I'm a Homo adapticus, right? I'm an individual who has learned to adapt and to look around my surroundings and make an impact. So as a person who is much more comfortable with who he is than he understood when he was younger, that's what I'm going to say. That I understand that I'm a different evolution of the species, and that's a beautiful thing. Also, some different things that I was experiencing when I grew up. Spent a lot of time in doctor's appointments. Spent a lot of time with physical therapists and occupational therapists and surgeons. I spent a lot of time with adults and not a lot of time with kids. So the intersectionality of my identity as an adult versus a child when I was a child is very interesting and complicated. And I remember my sister, Holly, once said to me when I was done hanging out with one of my friends, with a couple of my friends, she said, well, you know, James, they feel a little uncomfortable around you because you're so adult. I said, well, you know, I feel adult. I kind of am adult. That's been my experience up until that point. And I honestly was probably about 9 when I had this conversation. So this intersectionality of me as an adult versus a child and where I fit in there, it is a very interesting experience for me. And I will tell you, it made teaching middle school very, very difficult because my frame of reference for a teenager at the time was completely different than my frame of reference was different than the typical frame of reference because I just wasn't doing the similar things. And so again, intersectionality really I kind of played a part in that. But it also made me a stronger person in the sense that, okay, you are who you are. You either accept it and go along in this journey of acceptance or you struggle. And by the way, you're allowed to struggle in your identity. But as long as you're moving towards some frame of reference that leads to acceptance, that's fine. And yeah, I don't. I think that's really what I wanted to point out. Another layer of intersectionality, especially for somebody with a physical disability, lifelong physical disability, was that I'm so happy that Derek had a great experience, right? And so did I overall. But it is this intersectionality and balance between being allowed to be a kid and what that means, and having to be an adult and what that means too. So my experience growing up was always balancing these two kind of things, and it was difficult, but definitely worth it.
Thank you so much. That was really eye-opening to hear, your own personal experience and how growing up it had changed, and then also kind of being reflective of once you became a school teacher and then seeing school age children in junior high and where they're at, and for you to be able to identify with their identity and being able to share your experience with your students as well. I love that so much. I feel like both of you, Derek and James, have with your guys' experience has really had that time to figure out your own identity. And that has really helped you guys on your journey to become advocates today. So I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing. Our next question is, what are the hats that you wear? I'd like to direct this question to Jody Kinner. If you could just share with us a little bit about the hats that you wear.
Yeah. So I've been a working mom since my kids were born. So that's one of those things. I'm a working mom. I love my job. I love what I do. But also, as my children grew up, they saw me as a working mom. They saw that I was getting education. And I feel like it gave them something to look forward to, something that I guess I was able to set a good example for them, especially my daughter. I think it's important for her to have an education, to have options for a career in her future. One negative thing about that is being a working mom too, is sometimes I needed a support system, especially here in Utah, where it's a very strong at-home mom state. Having that support system to be able to take care of my kids was sometimes a struggle. As my kids got a little bit older, my son's now 19, my daughter's 17, life has become a little bit easier. But as my kids were, when they were younger, just experiencing working and being a mom was difficult. I think second, also, my kids were diagnosed as deaf, and I immediately became an advocate for their education because Utah is a strong support, or they really emphasize oralism, so speaking, lip reading, rather than using sign language. And I really wanted my kids grew up signing. I wanted them to have access to communication through ASL, American Sign Language. So I became a big advocate for that. My children are deaf. There are deaf and hard of hearing children all over the state who also need that great education. And I wanted them to have a good quality education. I wanted them to have an option, right? If parents wanted to allow their kids to sign or allow them to speak, that's fine. Whichever option they wanted, I wanted both options to be fine, right? Not just, you have to teach them to speak, you have to teach them to lip read and hope it works for you. I wanted parents to have an option to go whichever route they wanted to. So that's some of the hats I've worn.
Thank you so much for sharing, Jody. I think that it's really important when we're considering intersectionality to not only think about the identities or labels that society puts on us, but also the roles that we carry in our daily lives. And hats off to you, to all of the hats that you wear, that you are able to navigate your own disability, but also help continue that navigation with your children, and then also be an advocate on top of that. So those are amazing hats that you wear, and thank you so much for sharing your experience. I would also, actually, let's move on to question number 6. This one is a little bit more of a heavier question. So I'm going to read the question. It's, give an example of a moment or situation where you have felt unheard or silenced. I'd like to direct this question to Carleen. If you could start us off with giving us an example of a moment or a situation maybe where you felt unheard or silenced.
An uncomfortable part of this is that I was not, my parents didn't do a very good job of taking care of me when I was in high school and when my symptoms started to get really bad. I really wanted to go to therapy, and they really did not want me to go to therapy. And they also sort of punished me for some of my symptoms, and just generally, they did not do a great job of dealing with me as a mentally ill person. They also didn't do a very good job of dealing with me as a queer person for the first 5 or 7 years that I was out. There have been other times in my life where I've felt unheard or silenced, but none of them really impacted me the same way that I was impacted by my experiences with my parents. There are plenty of times when I've been acting as an advocate and I've been asked to change my language or things like that, but nothing really compares with having your parents sort of sideline you and treat you poorly.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience with us. I think that it's so important for you to be a part of this panel discussion and to share your experience with mental health, that it's one of those disabilities that's considered an invisible disability and may not receive as much validation as a visible disability because people, because you look like healthy and they're, they just visibly can't see anything wrong with you. And so maybe that could be a roadblock to you being able to be heard and receive the services that you need. So I'm thankful so much for you being a part of this panel discussion and sharing those experiences so that hopefully if people out there are listening and watch this can see how difficult your journey had been and how much better it could have been if you were able to be seen and be heard. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'd also like to direct this question to Brett. If you have an example, maybe of a moment or situation where you felt unheard or silenced.
Yeah. I don't have like a real dramatic example, but I have one scenario that happens time and time again. When my spouse, Kathy, and we may be at a fast food counter, we may be sitting at a table at a restaurant, and so many times they will say, a server or the person behind the counter will say directly to Kathy, what does he want? What will he have? And in the beginning, it was just kind of just a punch to the gut. I was like, wow, okay, I'm here. And Kathy, in the beginning, she would get a little bit snarky with them. She'd be like, hey, you could just ask him directly. Well, over time, we've realized that all that does is make people feel dumb. And they're not going to learn anything, and it doesn't change anything. And so we changed strategy. So now what we've learned to do in those situations, if they say, what does he want? What will he have? And just in case I didn't hear it, she give me a little nudge with her elbow, just let her know. And then I just start talking and we just don't make a thing about it. Just like, yeah, I want this, I want that, I want that, thanks. And then we try to make a point of me paying. So just holding out a credit card or whatever so that, just kind of a moment of example. It says, yeah, I'm here, I can do these things, I do it a little differently. Because I come to realize that people they haven't had that exposure. I was making the assumption that everybody had some kind of exposure and they were just, I was looking at the worst of people instead of the best of people. And coming to realize that I might be the first totally blind person they've ever seen or ever dealt with it behind the counter, and they're getting paid $9 an hour to serve food. And it's like, who am I to, belittle them for not knowing proper etiquette? So that's the example that stands out to me. And like I said, this has evolved over time. And I'm a little bit embarrassed how we handled it in the beginning, but we've grown and I've met some really great people because of it, and have actually started some conversations where I was able to share a little bit more, And again, that's one of those moments where I just want to go out to eat. I don't want to be the blind person going out to eat, but when a moment does come up that maybe you can educate someone and maybe change their life a little bit for the next visually impaired blind person that comes along, then more power to it.
I love that experience that you shared. And I think that is an example of being unheard, and maybe at times it's unintentional, but that you're using it as a teachable moment. Um, and that it could be referring back to one of our other questions that we had answered, what are the tools that you use to teach other people about who you are? And I think those teachable moments are definitely tools that you could use, and experiences and times that you could use to teach other people. Because, like you said, maybe that was their first experience being around blind people. And if we could normalize that experience, then maybe we could also, as a society, create a better experience for people in the blind community to go out and feel comfortable in those scenarios. Because a lot of people are definitely not as sociable as you and Kathy are. So I love that so much that you're using that experience. And I also love the part that you shared that sometimes it could be hard. You don't want to have to always be the person teaching everybody about yourself. You just want to simply go out and have lunch. And I think that's something, especially with intersectionality, for us to recognize that there's people that have specific identities where they don't have to share it everywhere they go. But then there's some people that they have no choice because those identities are visible. And it's, besides having a disability, maybe it's a person of color. You can't just automatically turn that color off. Or if you're in a wheelchair and you're using the wheelchair because you absolutely need it. So thank you so much for sharing that, Brett. I'm going to go on to our last question. And it's, can you tell us about when you felt your voice was heard and who included you? And I'd like to direct this question to James Johnson. If you could give us an example of a time that you felt your voice was heard, and who was it that included you?
I would say in this job, really, I have a voice where I'm being an advocate all the time, and really people are listening to me. When I tell a professor here at the university something needs to happen, I must tell you, I don't get really much payback at all. I mean, pushback. I get a lot of payback because they follow through. And so there's a lot of power in what we do as accessibility advocates and disability advisors over here at the U. So it's incredibly powerful, this job, in making sure my voice is heard. And I would say I've had smaller experiences throughout life where my voice is heard because I'm typically well-spoken, right? And people, they like to use my words for their own reasons. That can be good and bad, right? It's like statistics. You can make statistics say whatever you want them to say, right? And sometimes my voice is used to reinforce whatever people want to be reinforced. But overall, it's really a powerful experience. And I would say even when it's not been a positive experience, like when I would teach middle school and kids would physically impose themselves on me and push me out of the chair and bully me and do things that they shouldn't do, it turned out to be a really positive experience for a lot of the kids that watched that happen. Because you know what? Those kids are now adults and they are actually contacting me out of the blue saying, well, I remember this, Mr. Johnson, and I remember that. And I just want you to know that if I ever saw somebody who was marginalized or needed my assistance or who was being treated in that way, I wouldn't hesitate to help them. And I would do whatever I could. I would wait and see. I would ask if they needed my help or go to their side immediately if they needed me. But I would help them. And I want you to know that it's because of what I saw you go through. So even the negative can turn into a positive. Now, granted, I wish I wouldn't have gone through all of that, but I think it's a really powerful experience for me, and a moment where my voice is heard much long after it was actually voiced, but it came back to people, and it's really made an impact.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I love that you had that experience of not being heard. And then now later on, after you've experienced all of those, all of your life experiences and your journey with intersectionality, that you are now able to use your platform to be heard and to be the voice of those that you advocate for. So I love that so much. I'd like to direct the question to our last panelist before we go over to take a little time for some Q&A. If Derek could maybe answer this question, can you tell us about a time when you felt your voice was heard and who included you?
A time that I felt like my voice was heard. I took my daughter to the eye doctor, and she had an exam, and I was supposed to find out that she was nearsighted, but once the doctor found out that I was hearing impaired, he didn't want to take the time to communicate with me to let me know what was going on with my child. So as we sat there in the office, he said everything that's on the paper, that everything is on the paper that you need to know about your child's visual impairment. And I'm thinking to myself, hold on, wait, but everything that's on the paper is in medical terminology. So how do you really expect me to understand it? And he says, well, if you take the time to attempt to thoroughly understand it, then I promise you, you will grasp the concept. I felt very offended because my thing is, as a physician, it's your job to help me understand what's going on with my child to ensure that I'm caring for her correctly. So instead of you being impatient with my disability and not wanting to accommodate me by communicating in a different way, be patient with me, help me understand, because ultimately you're not here for me, you're here for my child. And the only way I can help my child is if you instruct me. So he walked out the room. He didn't want to do anything. I contacted his medical assistant, and I told her the situation. She got him, and they both stood there and explained to me the information. And she told him that I understand that we have a busy schedule, but we have obligation as medical professionals to help our clients and their parents understand what's going on with them. So it's our responsibility to take time out to help him understand. And I felt very pleased with that because I feel that by me not being able to hear you and by you not wanting to communicate with me what was going on with my daughter, you make me feel less of a good parent because I couldn't adequately care for my child. So don't use my disability as a ladder to make me feel more impaired. See my disability, accommodate it to minimize it so I can be a great parent. Because relationships in this world are interdependent. And we all, disability or not, have to rely on one another to be successful. So help me out because helping me out will help you out as well.
I love that so much because I'm a parent myself, and there are definitely times that I need some terminology from the doctor. Like that's probably the biggest, one of the most important things to me is to understand what's going on with my child. I love that we're really touching hard. You are touching hard on intersectional identities, in that you do have a disability, but you're also a parent. And your disability is not going to get in the way of you being an amazing parent and making sure that you understand what's going on with your child. And I think that you also touch on the importance of how important it is to learn how to advocate for yourself, whether you have a disability or not. If you're not getting the services and the resources that you need, to really know how to ask questions, who to ask, and be persistent to make sure that you're being heard and your voice is being heard. And it sounds like you navigated those waters yourself to make sure you were heard. And so I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing. I feel like everyone has shared so many great experiences, personal experiences. And I hope that those that are listening have something to take away from it, because I definitely have learned so much. I'm going to open our last, 10 minutes for questions, Q&A, if anyone from our attendees have any questions that they would like to ask. You can go ahead and submit those questions. Let's see. Right. So we don't have any questions coming in right now, but I feel like that's due to that you guys, I think the most important part of this panel discussion is that I really wanted to hear from each of you and your own authentic journeys and experiences that you have to share with everyone. We have had an array of disabilities that each of you identify with. And aside from that, there's an array of different identities that you guys share, and sexual orientation and roles that you play. So I love that so much. I do have a comment that came in from Shireen Miller, and she is the director of the Disability Resource Center here at Salt Lake Community College. She said that she'd like to say thank you to all of the participants for their openness and honesty and sharing your experiences. And Faye says, thanks so much for this information. And how can we pay this information forward? So I'm so thankful that each of you have been super open and very vulnerable. I kind of wanted to leave today on a lighthearted note. We did have a lot of heavy discussion, sometimes about, each of your guys' vulnerable moments in your personal lives. So I just wanted to share one more time a little video of intersectionality again, but through the eyes and the perspective of children. So I'm going to share that really quick.
I'm going to talk to you about intersectionality. You know what that means? You want me to explain it? Yeah.
So intersectionality is a concept that allows us to realize that people live like multidimensional lives. So for example, if someone is a Black woman and they're Black and they're also a woman, it's important to look at the possibility that they may experience sexism as well as racism at the same time.
So are you saying that say sexism is not experienced by everyone in the same way?
Exactly.
Thinking about and being conscious of the fact that we have a bunch of different things that make up our identity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Because I'm light-skinned, people think that I'm white, but I'm First Nations. Intersectionality also is like a big puzzle from your toes to your head, tip top of your head. I don't know, I don't understand what this is actually meaning. Every single part that's in you has to make you you. Oh, no, I get it. I get it now. So people aren't just the one picture. The whole picture basically has to need your whole entire personality going together to make you.
Wow, thank you. That's really cool. High five.
Girl, you have to do this because boys have to do this. Only boys can go to this specific club. You have to have this certain amount of Pokemon cards to be in this club. And that's basically what it goes like.
I think it's interesting to see the perspective and to hear children's perspective of what intersectional identities are. I just want to thank everyone again, all of our panelists, Carleen, Derek, Jody, Brett, and James, for sharing your guys' experience with us today on behalf of the Salt Lake Community College Disability Resource Center for our Diversibility event. Thank you guys so much for your participation, and I hope you guys all enjoy the rest of your day.